Okay, so you've joined us for another deep dive, and wow, the source material this time. Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fick. It's quite a title.
It definitely grabs your attention, doesn't it? And I think the key thing here, right off the bat, is realizing this isn't about just like throwing your hands up and being indifferent.
Right, not apathy.
No, it's much more about consciously choosing where you put your focus, your energy,
Yeah.
what actually deserves, well, a fic.
And the starting point is interesting. Charles Bukowski, the writer.
Yeah, not exactly the first person you'd think of for life advice, maybe.
Definitely not. Heavy drinker, womanizer, gambler. Sounds like he had a pretty rough go for decades. Then suddenly, like in his 50s, he gets this chance.
Right, this publisher takes a chance on him.
Yeah, and he has his choice. Keep the dead-end post office job or, risk it all to write full-time. He chooses writing. His first novel, Post Office. Dedicated to nobody.
And that's kind of classic Bukowski, isn't it? But what's fascinating and really central to Manson's whole argument is what came later. Success. Against the odds.
Yeah, success despite everything. But the real kicker, the thing that makes you stop and think, is his tombstone.
Ah, yes.
Don't try.
Exactly. It just flies in the face of every hustle harder, never give up message we hear constantly.
It does. And Manson uses Bukowski to suggest that maybe his success wasn't about relentless striving in the conventional sense. Maybe it was about a kind of radical acceptance.
Accepting himself, warts and all. Not trying to be something he wasn't.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He wasn't trying to be a winner in the way society defines it. He was just Bukowski.
Yeah.
And that honesty resonated. It makes you ask, how much energy are you spending trying to fit some mold?
That's a good question. It really sets up this core problem Manson sees in, well, modern life.
Which is,
This constant gnawing pressure to always want more. Better job, nicer house, perfect partner, the newest phone.
the list never ends. Never. We're basically told we need to care, like, deeply about everything, every little thing. Keeping up with the Joneses, online personas, it's just a lot.
It really is. And it cultivates this feeling that you're always falling short, doesn't it? That
Yeah.
something's missing if you don't have all that stuff.
Totally. Which leads straight into what Manson calls the feedback loop from hell. I think a lot of us can relate to this one.
Definitely. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
you feel anxious about, say, a confrontation. Then you start feeling anxious about feeling anxious. Like, why am I so anxious? This is bad.
Or you get angry and then you get angry at yourself for being angry. I shouldn't feel this way.
Exactly. It's this downward spiral where the negative feeling just feeds itself.
And a big part of that, Manson argues, is the cultural pressure, especially with social media, right? Everyone's posting their highlight reel.
Oh, totally. It's all weddings, amazing vacations,
Correct.
launching some billion-dollar app.
Yeah, it looks like nonstop amazingness.
Yeah.
So when you feel anxious or angry or sad, it's easy to think, what's wrong with me?
Like you're the only one not invited to the party.
Precisely. And Manson's, well, counterintuitive advice is basically stop giving effect that you feel bad.
Okay, hold on. That sounds dismissive.
Not dismissive, more like acceptance. It's not about ignoring the feeling, but accepting it as, part of the deal, part of being human.
So accept that feeling bad is normal.
Yeah. And accept that the world, as he puts it quite bluntly, is kind of messed up, and it always has been. That acceptance can actually break the loop.
Okay, I see. So not giving a fick isn't apathy.
No, it's the subtle art of choosing. It's about conscious choice. Deciding what truly matters to you, what aligns with your core values, and reserving your energy, your facts for that.
And letting the other stuff go.
Letting it go, or at least not letting it consume you. It takes discipline, actually. It's not lazy, it's focused.
He uses this example that really stuck with me, the old lady in the supermarket.
The coupon lady.
Yeah. Getting incredibly worked up over like a 30-cent coupon difference.
Mm.
It seems absurd on the surface.
Right. But Manson flips it. He asks, well, maybe that coupon is all she feels she has left to care about. Maybe the bigger things in her life feel so out of control that this tiny thing is where she directs all that energy, all those remaining flecks.
Wow. That puts a different spin on it.
Mhm.
It makes you think about where you might be focusing energy on small stuff because the big stuff feels too big.
Exactly. It shows this fundamental need we have to invest ourselves, to care about something. And if the big, meaningful things aren't there or feel overwhelming, we might latch onto the trivial. It's kind of sad, but also very human.
And he connects this to aging, right?
Yeah.
How maybe as we get older, we naturally become more selective.
Yeah, maturity often brings a sort of dwindling flick budget, you could say. You
Well,
start realizing a lot of the things you stressed about when you were younger just don't matter that much in the long run.
your priorities shift, you've seen more, you've learned what lasts.
Experience is a good teacher. You reserve your energy for what he calls the truly flick-worthy, maybe family, close friends, your health, things with real substance.
He even quotes The Wire, doesn't he?
He does. Bunkmoreland's classic line. That's what you get for giving a feck when it wasn't your turn to give a feck. There's wisdom in knowing when it's your turn, when something is actually worth your investment.
Which ties into this idea he calls a psychological epidemic. What's that about?
It's this pervasive modern idea that it's basically not okay to feel bad, that things shouldn't suck sometimes.
Like constant positivity is the only acceptable state.
Pretty much. And when things inevitably do suck because life involves struggle, people feel like it's their fault. They blame themselves.
And then they overcompensate.
Yeah, trying to numb the pain or project an image of success, maybe through buying tons of stuff, maybe through addiction, maybe just frantic busyness, trying to avoid the discomfort.
So what's the alternative if constant happiness isn't the goal?
He calls it practical enlightenment, which sounds maybe a bit lofty.
A little bit, yeah.
But he defines it pretty simply. It's just becoming comfortable with the messy reality of life, accepting that suffering, failure, loss, regret, even death, these are unavoidable parts of the experience.
So embracing the crap life throws at
Oh,
you.
basically, yeah. Not necessarily liking it, but accepting its inevitability. That acceptance builds resilience because you're not fighting reality anymore.
He tells that story about the prince to illustrate this.
Oh, the confused prince, yes. A great little parable. First, he thinks his riches are making him miserable, so he gives it all up and seeks out extreme suffering, like lives as a beggar.
Thinking that's the answer.
Right. But he realizes that suffering just for the sake of suffering without any purpose is also meaningless. It doesn't lead to enlightenment either.
So neither extreme worked.
Exactly. His big realization is that suffering is just baked into life. The rich have problems, the poor have problems. Having a family brings challenges. Being alone brings different challenges. Pleasure has its downsides. Abstinence has its downsides. There's no escape from problems.
Which leads us perfectly to Disappointment Panda.
Disappointment panda. Probably my favorite concept in the book.
He's the superhero we need but don't want.
Totally.
Yeah.
He's the one who shows up to tell you the harsh truths you'd rather ignore. Like, hey, maybe that dream job isn't actually making you happy, or your relationship is kind of built on shaky ground.
Stuff that stings but maybe needs to be heard.
Exactly. Like physical pain tells you something's wrong. Don't touch the hot stove.
Yeah.
Emotional pain, the stuff Disappointment Panda points out, is also feedback. It signals something needs attention.
And the big truth Disappointment Panda delivers is
Life is essentially an endless series of problems. Solve one and another pops up. It's just the nature of things.
so the goal isn't a life without problems.
No, that's impossible and probably wouldn't even be desirable. The goal, Manson argues, is to have better problems. Problems you choose and maybe even enjoy solving.
Okay. Better problems? How does that work?
Well, think about it. Happiness doesn't come from avoiding problems altogether. It comes from engaging with them, from the process of solving them. That's where satisfaction lies.
Which is the opposite of the victim mentality.
Right. That's when you avoid solving problems by blaming everyone or everything else. It's not my fault, it's the economy, or it's my parents' fault, or my boss is unfair.
It might feel better for a second blaming someone else.
Sure, it absolves you of responsibility temporarily. But Manson says it leaves you powerless. Those negative emotions, anger, frustration, sadness, they're actually calls to action. They're signals that a problem needs addressing by you.
And problems just keep coming, right?
Yeah.
He talks about them being recursive.
Yeah, solve one, create another. You finally get into that relationship you wanted. Great. Now you have relationship problems, disagreements, compromises.
Buy the dream house.
Now you have leaky faucets and property taxes, get the amazing job. Now you have deadlines and office politics. Everything comes with inherent sacrifices, inherent problems. There's no free lunch.
So it's not about escaping problems. It's about choosing which problems you're willing to live with.
That's the crux of it. Which leads to maybe the most profound question in the book. What is the pain that you want to sustain?
That hits differently than what do you want to achieve?
Totally. Because lots of people want the result, the fit body, the successful career, the great relationship. But are they willing to embrace the struggle required to get there? The pain, the effort, the sacrifice?
He uses his own dream, wanting to be a rock star.
Yeah. Loved the idea of it, the fame, the stage, the adoration. But did he love the endless hours of practice, lugging gear, playing to empty rooms, the constant rejection?
Apparently not. He wanted the outcome, not the process.
Exactly. And that's a key distinction. Who you become is defined not just by what you value, but by what struggles you're willing to endure for those values.
Which challenges the whole idea of just building up self-esteem, right?
Yeah, he's critical of that feel-good, everyone's a winner kind of self-esteem.
Yeah.
He contrasts this guy, Jimmy, who talks a big game and seems confident, but whose life is a mess.
All talk, no walk.
Right. With the idea that true self-worth isn't just about feeling good about your successes, it's actually about how you feel about your negative aspects, your flaws. Can you accept them? Can you work on them?
So if your self-worth only comes from external validation or ignoring your flaws, that's entitlement.
That's how Manson frames it. Entitlement is feeling you deserve good things without earning them, without struggle. It creates this bubble where everything is either proof of how great you are or evidence of how unfair the world is to you.
And this ties into responsibility versus fault. That's a really important distinction he makes.
Crucial. You are not always at fault for the bad things that happen to you, but you are always responsible for how you choose to respond.
Like his story about being searched for drugs at school.
Exactly. It wasn't his fault he got singled out, but it was his responsibility to deal with the situation, how he reacted, what he did next.
Or dealing with the emotional fallout from his parents' divorce, even though he wasn't the cause.
Right. You didn't cause the problem, but the emotions, the consequences, those are now yours to manage. Taking responsibility is about owning your response, regardless of fault.
And he suggests that avoiding that responsibility, that pain, can actually lead to entitlement, kind of overcompensating.
Yeah, he talks about his own experiences after, like, a rough adolescence. Feeling inadequate led him to constantly seek validation in relationships, developing entitled attitudes as a defense mechanism.
And entitlement shows up in two ways.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah.
Either you expect everyone else to solve your problems and cater to your feelings, or you take on too much responsibility for other people's problems, often to feel needed or in control. Both stem from avoiding your own stuff.
And the media landscape doesn't help with what he calls the tyranny of exceptionalism.
Not at all. We're just bombarded constantly with the extremes. The biggest successes, the most beautiful people, the most shocking tragedies.
So average starts to feel like failure.
Exactly. It creates these unrealistic expectations that everyone should be extraordinary. And when you inevitably feel, well, ordinary, it can breed inadequacy, anxiety, and that sense of entitlement. I should be exceptional. Why isn't it happening?
It makes you feel like you're missing out if you're not crushing it 24/7.
Right. And it's not just millennials, he points out. This pressure affects everyone exposed to it.
To illustrate the danger of being too certain, too rigid in your beliefs, he tells that wild story about Hiru Onoda,
Oh man, that story is incredible. The Japanese soldier in the Philippines.
who just refused to believe World War II was over for, what, almost 30 years?
Yeah, hiding in the jungle, still fighting a war that ended decades earlier. People tried to tell him, dropped leaflets, his own brother came.
And he just wouldn't accept it. He was so certain in his mission, his reality.
It's an extreme example, obviously, but it powerfully illustrates the danger of clinging to certainty, of refusing to update your beliefs, even when faced with overwhelming evidence, how easily we can get locked into our own narratives.
And then there's the guy who found him, Norio Suzuki, kind of an oddball adventurer himself.
Right. Suzuki had these quirky life goals, like finding a Noda, finding a panda, and finding the abominable snowman. Both men were driven by deeply held, maybe unconventional, certainties and values.
Which brings us to values and metrics. Can you break those down?
Sure. So your values are basically what you believe is important. Honesty, adventure, family, creativity, whatever. Your metrics are how you measure whether you're living up to those values.
Okay, makes sense.
But choosing the wrong metric can screw things up. Manson uses his relationship with his brother as an example. Maybe the value was connection, but if the metric was just how often do we talk, that might be a poor way to measure genuine connection.
So you need good values and good metrics.
Exactly. Are the ways you're measuring success actually reflecting what you truly care about?
Because you can have crappy values, as he calls them.
Definitely. Like Dave Mustaine from Megadeth.
Yeah.
Phenomenally successful musician by almost any standard.
Right, sold millions of albums.
But Manson suggests his primary metric, his core value almost, seemed to be comparing himself to Metallica, the band he got kicked out of early on.
So even with huge success, he felt like a failure compared to them.
It seemed that way, because his chosen value, or at least his metric, guaranteed dissatisfaction. He was measuring himself against something external and, frankly, impossible to beat in his own mind.
Contrast that with Pete Best.
Yeah, the original Beatles drummer. Kicked out right before they hit megastardom. You'd think that would destroy someone.
Easily.
But apparently Best eventually found real happiness. He shifted his values away from fame and rock stardom towards family, a stable life. He chose different values, different metrics, and found contentment.
So real self-improvement isn't about feeling good all the time.
No, it's about choosing better values. Values that are reality-based, socially constructive, and controllable. Choosing better values leads to better problems.
Better problems lead to a better life.
That's the idea. It's an ongoing process of refining what you choose to care about.
And the feeling of choice is huge here.
Absolutely massive. He talks about the difference between a painful problem and a powerful problem, often coming down to whether you feel you chose it, whether you feel responsible for it.
Like the childbirth example.
Perfect example. Objectively, it's intense physical pain.
Yeah.
But if it's chosen, part of bringing a wanted child into the world, it's experienced completely differently than if that same pain were inflicted against someone's will. Choice transforms the experience.
He also mentions William James, the philosopher.
Yeah, James had a tough time. Lifelong health issues, immense pressure from his father, tried different careers, fell into deep depression.
Sounds bleak.
It was. But crucially, James made a conscious choice. He basically decided to believe in free will, to take responsibility for his own life and beliefs, even without absolute proof. He chose his values, his path. That act of choosing was transformative.
It contrasts with, say, the short guy obsessed with his height.
Right. If your value is something you can't control, like height, you've chosen a disempowering value, a crappy problem you can never solve. It guarantees frustration. James chose values he could act on.
Manson also gets personal with the breakup story.
Yeah, that's quite revealing. Painful breakup, and initially it was all about blaming the ex-girlfriend. Felt justified, maybe, but didn't help him grow.
So what changed?
He realized he had to take responsibility for his own role, his own emotions, his own actions in the relationship and the breakup. Owning his part, even the ugly bits, was what allowed him to learn, heal, and eventually have healthier relationships.
It's that responsibility piece again. Even for your own happiness.
Exactly. It's not saying the other person did nothing wrong, but your growth comes from focusing on what you control. Your responses, your choices, your values.
And this applies even to things we definitely didn't choose, like our genetics or a bad childhood.
Absolutely. Manson is clear, you don't choose the hand you're dealt. Bad genes, trauma, whatever, that's not your fault. But how you play that hand, that is always your responsibility.
Like the teens with OCD he mentions.
Yeah. They didn't choose to have OCD, but they could learn to take responsibility for managing it, for shifting their values away from obsessive thoughts and towards actions they did control. It's about agency within your circumstances.
But the internet sometimes makes it easy to avoid that responsibility, right?
Yeah.
What he calls victimhood chic.
Oh, yeah. That's a controversial point, but relevant. He argues that social media can sometimes incentivize broadcasting victimhood because it generates attention and sympathy, maybe even a sense of moral superiority through outrage.
And the danger is?
Well, one danger is that it can distract from actual victims with less voice. Another is that it can become a way to constantly push responsibility onto others, hindering personal growth. It feels good momentarily, perhaps, but can be disempowering long-term.
So instead of seeking external validation through victimhood or outrage, he advocates doubt.
Yes, the importance of doubt. He argues that certainty is the enemy of growth. Being too sure you're right, too convinced of your own narrative, closes you off to learning and evolving.
We should question our own beliefs.
Yeah.
Even our feelings.
Especially our beliefs and feelings. We need to cultivate humility, entertain the possibility that we might be wrong. We don't always know what an experience truly means in the long run. What seems bad now might lead to good later, and vice versa.
He talks about us being architects of our own beliefs.
Yeah, using that button-pushing experiment, people convinced themselves they were causing a light to turn on, even when it was totally random. Our brains desperately want to find patterns and meaning, even if they have to invent them.
And memory is unreliable, too.
Highly unreliable. We rewrite our past constantly to fit our current beliefs and values. He mentions the unsettling case of Meredith, who developed false memories of abuse based on therapy sessions and her current emotional state. Our minds aren't objective recorders.
So given how flawed our minds and memories are, pure certainty is dangerous.
Very dangerous. It leads to rigidity, entitlement, and poor decisions. He gives examples like Erin, the self-improvement junkie, totally detached from reality because she was so certain of her positive thinking.
Or The friend's brother, who was hypercritical of his sister's fiancé, absolutely certain he knew best.
Right. Manson suggests asking yourself a key question when you feel that righteous certainty creeping in. If I were wrong about this, would being wrong create a better or worse problem than my current situation for both myself and others?
That forces some
It
perspective.
really does. It introduces humility and considers the impact on others.
Then he pivots to failure, framing it as essential. Failure is the way forward.
Yeah, drawing on his own story again, graduating into the Great Recession, early business ventures flopping.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Could have been, but he reframes it. Hitting rock bottom early was actually freeing. It lowered the stakes. Failing wasn't so scary anymore because he already done it.
And his core value helped.
Definitely. His main value was freedom, autonomy. So, not taking risks, not pursuing his own path that would have been the real failure for him. The setbacks were just part of the process towards that value.
Which leads to the failure-success paradox.
Right, using Picasso as the example. Picasso didn't seem to aim for specific goals like paint X masterpieces. His driving value was something more like honest expression.
Something ongoing, never finished.
Exactly. A humble, process-oriented value. And because he was committed to the process, the failures and experiments along the way were just part of it, fueling decades of creativity and likely a deeper sense of satisfaction than just chasing external validation.
And pain is part of that process, too.
Absolutely unavoidable. He mentions Kazimierz Dabrowski's work studying WWII survivors.
What did Dabrowski find?
That profound psychological growth, what he called positive disintegration, often requires intense emotional pain and turmoil. Our biggest breakthroughs often come after our worst moments, forcing us to rebuild our values and perspectives.
So pain isn't just something to be avoided, it can be transformative.
It can be, yes, if we engage with it constructively.
He has this great term, VCR questions. What are those?
Huh. Yeah, remember how baffling VCRs could seem to older generations? VCR questions are those problems that seem simple on the surface, but feel impossibly hard because of the emotional pain we anticipate.
Like dropping out of school, or asking someone on a date.
Or telling your adult kids it's time they moved out. Intellectually simple, maybe, but emotionally loaded. The fear of conflict, rejection, or hurting someone paralyzes us.
And the solution.
Action. Don't wait for motivation. He argues action isn't just the effect of motivation, it's also the cause. Just do something, anything related to the problem. That small action can generate momentum and motivation to keep going.
Interesting. Do something, then feel motivated.
Often, yeah. The do something principle.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, he talks about his own experience with, like, too much freedom, traveling everywhere.
Yeah, he spent years basically bouncing around the world, chasing new experiences. Sounds great.
Sounds amazing.
And it was, for a while. But he realized it was all breadth, no depth. Constant novelty led to superficial highs, but nothing felt truly significant or lasting. He felt untethered.
So endless freedom wasn't the answer either.
No, which leads to another paradox, the freedom of constraints.
Meaning commitment actually makes you freer. How does that work?
Well, think about the paradox of choice. Too many options can be paralyzing, anxiety-inducing. Committing to something, a relationship, a career path, a place, a craft, actually limits your choices in a good way.
It simplifies things, reduces FOMO.
Exactly. It frees up mental energy because you're not constantly wondering what if. And commitment allows for depth. You get richer experiences, deeper connection, a greater mastery than you ever could by just skimming the surface of everything.
And commitment requires saying no.
Absolutely. Choosing one value, one path, one person means implicitly or explicitly rejecting the alternatives. You can't have it all. Learning to say no, establishing boundaries, is crucial for a meaningful, committed life.
He gets into boundaries in relationships using Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, his satirical take. He basically argues it's a terrible model for love, obsessive, codependent, defying boundaries, leading to, well, a double suicide.
Not exactly #relationship goals.
Not really. Healthy love, he argues, isn't about merging completely or dying for each other. It's about two individuals with clear boundaries, taking responsibility for their own stuff, supporting each other, and being able to handle conflict and even rejection respectfully.
And poor boundaries lead to toxic stuff.
Yeah, either taking too much responsibility for your partner's feelings and problems or expecting them to take too much responsibility for yours. That lack of clear lines is where toxicity breeds.
So how do you build trust if it's broken, especially around boundaries or values?
It's a process. First, you have to acknowledge what value is actually broken. Then, crucially, you need to demonstrate a track record of changed behavior over time. Words aren't enough. Consistent action showing commitment to different, healthier values is key.
It takes time and consistency.
For sure. And he wraps up this section reinforcing that idea. Commitment isn't a trap. It's the gateway to a different kind of freedom, a deeper kind of experience. Depth over breadth.
Powerful stuff. Which brings us right to the final chapter, and that title,
Mm-hmm.
And Then You Die. Doesn't pull any punches.
No, it doesn't. He starts with a really moving story about his friend Josh dying suddenly in an accident.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly impactful.
It clearly shook him to the core, forced him to confront mortality in a very immediate way.
And led to a kind of breakthrough realization.
Yeah, this somewhat paradoxical thought. If there really is no ultimate cosmic reason to do anything, then there is also no reason not to do anything.
Oh, is that freeing?
Because if nothing matters in the grand ultimate sense and death is inevitable, why be paralyzed by fear? Why worry so much about embarrassment or failure or what other people think? In the face of death, a lot of that stuff just seems small. It freed him up to choose his values based on this life, not some ultimate judgment.
He connects this to Ernest Becker's ideas, too.
Right, Becker's death terror. The idea that much of human activity, our striving, our values, our immortality projects like legacy or family or achievement, it's all fundamentally driven by a deep, often unconscious fear of our own physical death.
We're trying to create meaning to outlast our bodies.
Essentially, yeah. And Manson suggests that becoming aware of this, questioning why we hold the values we do, can help us choose them more consciously, less driven by that underlying fear.
He describes standing on that cliff, the Cape of Good Hope,
As a way to viscerally feel that mortality, the vastness, the power of nature, his own smallness. He said it kind of obliterated his petty anxieties and superficial values, gave him perspective.
Have you ever had a moment like that, where your own mortality felt very real?
I think many people have, perhaps during illness or loss, or even just moments of awe in nature. It can be unsettling, but also incredibly clarifying. It refocuses you on what truly matters now.
And Manson's final message isn't bleak, despite the focus on death.
Not at all. It's actually quite empowering. He says, essentially, you are already great. Why? Because you're alive, conscious, and grappling with these huge questions. The very act of choosing what to give a fuck about in this confusing world with death as the endpoint, that is significant.
There's dignity in the struggle itself.
Exactly. And he ends with that Bukowski quote again, which feels even more poignant now.
We're all gonna die, all of us. What a circus. That alone should make us love each other, but it doesn't. We are terrorized and flattened by life's trivialities. We are eaten up by nothing.
It's hard, doesn't it? How much energy we waste on trivialities, forgetting the big picture, the shared journey towards the same end.
So the final takeaway is, embrace the end to live better now.
I think so. Accepting your own death, not morbidly, but as a reality, can paradoxically lighten the load. The struggles, the fears, the choices, they still matter, but maybe the weight lessens. It frees you up to focus on your impact, your legacy in terms of how you live and affect others, rather than just accumulating things or fearing judgment.
A really challenging, but
Yeah.
ultimately maybe liberating perspective to end on.
Definitely. It's not your typical self-help message, but it forces you to confront some fundamental truths and hopefully make more conscious choices about how you spend your limited time and energy, your finite number of recs. A lot to chew on for sure.